I don't want to take up any more time because I know why you guys are here. So I'm going to pass it off to Angela. Angela, I'm going to make it so that you should be able to share your screen. And I'm going to ask everybody else if we could all mute ourselves. And then if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or save them till the end, and then we'll have a question time at the end. So,
okay, I'm gonna, whoops. I'm gonna, shoot. I'm gonna try and post a bunch of links in the chat, but maybe I'll do that afterwards. Okay, so if this works. There we go. So I work for the Xerces Society, and we're a nonprofit, and our goal is to protect biodiversity by protecting invertebrates. And much of our work focuses on pollinators. So we have a ton of resources on our website. I'll post some links in the chat when I'm done. But today I'm going to talk about protecting the pollinators in our community. So I'm going to start with some very brief biology of pollinators. I think we all know pollinators are important, especially to terrestrial ecosystems, because 85% of flowering plants require an animal, usually an insect, for pollination. So all these plants need pollinators to reproduce, and all of the animals that rely on plants for food, seeds and berries, rely on those pollinators. And so do we, right? For much of our diet is dependent on pollinators. Our economy and agriculture are dependent on pollinators. So there are 6 main groups of insect pollinators. There are, can you see my cursor? Hopefully, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps, and bees. And of these, bees are the most important and efficient pollinators. So butterflies, let's talk a little bit about butterflies and moths. Most butterflies, although there's one species I know of that's predaceous, but as caterpillars, most butterflies and moths feed on leaves. And the plant that they feed on as a caterpillar or a larvae is called the host plant. So these are the plants that the caterpillars need to feed on in order to mature into adults. And for many species of butterflies and moths, as caterpillars, they're specialists, meaning they only feed on most butterflies and moths are specialists. So most butterflies will drink nectar from a variety of plants. So a good example of that is the monarch butterfly. So here's a monarch caterpillar feeding on milkweed. That's the host plant for monarchs. And as adults, they'll feed on a variety of plants. And thistles are actually excellent pollinator plants. To tell the difference between butterflies and moths, you can look at their wings, how they hold their wings, or their antennae. So this one on the right is a moth, and you can see it holds its wings sort of down and back, kind of like a cape, whereas butterflies on the right here hold their wings out or sometimes up and together, kind of like a sailboat sail. So you can look at the way they hold their wings. The other difference is the antennae. So butterfly antennae have these little knobs or clubs at the end. So they're widened at the tips, whereas moths, their antennae are the same width throughout the length, or some species have these feather-shaped antennae. So you can tell the difference by the way they hold their wings or the shape of their antennae, but not necessarily by how showy they are, because there are some really showy, lovely moths. Okay, as I said, bees are the best pollinators. They have special structures on their bodies to carry pollen, which makes them very efficient pollinators. When most people think of a bee, they think of a honeybee. And honeybees are incredibly important to our economy, to our agriculture. They're really fascinating animals. They're actually not from the US, they're from North America. There are actually a huge number of bees that have evolved here in the US. So roughly 3,600 different species of bees in the US and Canada, and here in California, 1,600 species of native bees. So huge diversity. It's fun to know that scientists have documented almost 400 bee species in Pinnacles National Park, making it one of the most diverse bee communities on the planet, which I think is pretty cool, and it's just a few hours from here. So everyone's familiar with honeybees and the way they have these hives. Most wild bees are actually solitary, and most of them nest in the ground. So about 70% of all bees are ground nesting bees. About 30% are cavity nesting bees. So they either nest in the stems of plants or they'll nest in dead wood or cavities like that. And then 1% are hive nesting bees. So those are the honeybees and bumblebees. So honeybees are actually very unusual in the bee world. This is the life cycle of a ground nesting bee. So the females collect pollen, and the female will excavate a nest. And sometimes these nests can be several feet deep. And I've heard of cases where they're actually several meters deep into the ground, and they create these brood cells. That's what they call where they care for an egg. So what they do is they collect pollen and they make this pollen loaf. So they make a loaf, they put it in the brood cell, lay an egg on it, and then they'll close up the cell and dig a new cell, a new brood cell, and then collect pollen to provision that cell and the egg. And then the egg hatches and the larvae eats the pollen, and it grows until the pupal stage. So that's the stage right before it metamorphoses into an adult. And that stage often lasts for several months. So these bees actually spend most of their time underground, and then they'll emerge in spring or summer to match the timing of when the plants that they rely on are blooming. Because there are several bees that are actually specialists, just like butterflies can be specialists. There are bees that rely on certain groups of flowers or certain species of flowers for pollen and nectar. And I said females, the males don't actually collect any pollen. They don't help. As I said, wild bees are wonderfully diverse. This is a photo of the smallest known species of bee on the head of the largest known species of bee. It's a huge variety. I'm just going to show you some pictures. So this is a bumblebee. Bumblebees are in the same family as honeybees, and they have these structures on their legs, like their legs are kind of widened and they have kind of this flattish concave shape, and they're called pollen baskets. So you'll find mounds of wet pollen kind of stuck to the sides of their legs. That's how they carry their pollen. Bumblebees are really charismatic, they're buzzy. The first bee covered under the Endangered Species Act is a bumblebee. Actually the only bee right now. This is a metallic green sweat bee. These are beautiful animals. They're really striking. They're also really common. So if you start watching for bees in your garden, you'll probably see some of these. You can see they have these long hairs on the hind leg that they use for collecting pollen. So a lot of bees carry their pollen on their legs. This is a leafcutter bee. It's a cavity nesting bee, and it lines the brood cells with pieces of leaf. And they really love redbud. As you can see, they cut out almost these perfectly circular pieces. And so if you notice, if it looks like somebody went at one of your plants with a hole punch, you probably have some leafcutter bees nearby. These are in a family called the megacylids, and you'll notice they have the hairs for carrying pollen on their belly. So they carry their pollen on the undersides of their abdomen. So lots of different ways of collecting pollen. This is a cuckoo bee, and you'll see that it doesn't have any special structures for collecting pollen. So that it might be a male, but it's not a male, it's a cuckoo bee. And those of you who are familiar with cuckoo birds might guess why. And the reason is that these are nest parasites. So they allow other species to go out and collect the pollen, and they kind of lurk around the nest entrance. And when the female's gone, they'll zip in and try and lay their eggs in the brood cells and let someone else do all the work. And this behavior has evolved many different times. So there are lots of different types of cuckoo bees. There's some bumblebees that are cuckoo bees. It's a really fascinating behavior, I think. So many wild bees are at risk. We know that honeybees aren't doing well. We hear a lot about that. And the same is true with our wild bees. It's harder to get a clear picture of what's going on because many of these species are solitary and they're harder to study than a honeybee hive, for example. But what we do know indicates that our wild bees are also doing poorly. So about 50% of leafcutter bees species are at risk of extinction, about 27% of mason bees. This is a blue orchard bee. And a lot of people are trying to rear these because they're better. They're really efficient at pollinating orchard trees. And bumblebees, about 28% of all North American bumblebee species are at risk of extinction. The same is true of butterflies. So these are some data from monarch butterflies. And many of you probably know this, at winter, they form these clusters in trees. The Western monarchs go to the California coast. And since 1997, the Xerces Society has organized the Thanksgiving count to monitor the Western monarch population. So these green bars are the abundance over time. So in 1997, there were 1.2 million butterflies counted along the coast. And over time, that number dropped and kind of hovered around 200,000. This blue line is the number of sites monitored. So you can see over time, we were monitoring more and more sites, but the number was staying the same. And then in 2018, the population crashed. So it went from just under 200,000 to just under 30,000 monarchs. And the same in 2019, under 30,000 monarchs. And then this winter, we counted less than 2,000 monarchs along the coast, which is a huge drop. It's hugely worrying. It's a 99.9% decline from the 1980s when there were an estimated 4 million monarchs overwintering along the California coast. So this is bad news. It's sort of an all hands on deck moment, but I also just want to point out that long-term monitoring of butterflies in this region have found about 23 species of butterflies doing just as bad or worse than the monarchs. And that's data collected by Art Shapiro from UC Davis. He's got a series of transects going from the Bay Area to Donner Pass that he's been monitoring for over 45 years. So it's a huge amount of data. It's a lot of information telling us that pollinators aren't doing great. And it's sort of the usual suspects. Habitat loss is always a driver of biodiversity loss. Animals need space to live and eat. Pesticides is a big driver. Diseases and non-native species can be a problem. We hear about diseases causing honeybees to decline, and honeybees and managed bumblebees can pass those diseases on to wild bees. And then climate change is a problem. I'm just going to talk quickly about pesticides for those of you who've been in meetings before with me and wonder why is she always drawing out about pesticides. This is why. So we did a study in 2019. We wanted to know if the monarchs in the Central Valley were encountering pesticides in the milkweed that they eat. So again, milkweed is their host plant. This is showy milkweed. So we collected leaves from 227 different plants in different landscapes, with ag landscapes, urban and natural areas. What we found was that every single sample had pesticides, every single plant. And the average was 9 different pesticides per plant. We found 64 different pesticides total. The plants with the most kinds of pesticides were the ones we purchased from retail nurseries and one roadside ag site, actually where this picture was taken. So they had about 25 different pesticides on them. My coworker, who has been in her house for eight or 9 years and doesn't use pesticides, she sent some of her milkweed leaves in as an urban site, and she had 9 different pesticides. And she was incredibly upset. And that it's this issue of drift. So it's not just the pesticides that I might be adding in my home It's what your neighbors are using and their neighbors are using, and the people across the street. These pesticides are moving around on the air currents. And so I think we need to think about, as a community, it's not just what individuals are using in our home that our pollinators and our other wildlife and our pets and our families are being exposed to. It's what everybody around us is using as well. One type of pesticide that we really need to worry about are neonicotinoids. They're long-lived, so they stay in the environment for months or sometimes years when applied to trees. And they're really toxic to bees, and they're systemic. So what that means, this little cartoon shows, if you spray the plant, it gets taken up and expressed in all the different tissues. So if I spray a leaf, that pesticide is going to show up in the pollen and the nectar. The other problem with this pesticide is it goes into the soil and it gets taken up by the surrounding plants. So if you're careful not to use pesticides in your garden, then you buy a plant that has been treated with neonics or other systemic insecticides and plant it, those pesticides are going to be taken up by all the surrounding plants. So that's a real problem. And I think it's something though that we have a real opportunity to address, because often the uses in urban areas, we're not using them often for commercial reasons. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for change there. There's a lot we can do, right? This is some depressing information, but there's a lot we can do to help pollinators. And I think the good thing about working for pollinators is that there's meaningful things that we can do every day, and we can see a difference right away. So the best things we can do is create habitat. We can plant pollinator gardens in our communities, around our homes, where we work. We can reduce pesticide use, especially insecticides, around our homes. Jeff Harris helped pass a city ordinance to ban neonic use on city property, which is great. It's a great first step. Obviously, people can use it on their own homes still. We can plant native trees. There are many, many species of butterflies and moths that use trees as host plants. So our native oaks, maples, sycamores, all of those support butterflies. And then the animals such as birds that rely on those for food. We can advocate for change like we do it in the Garden Art Club, and contribute to community science. So no space is too small, even if we don't have a yard. A container garden can make a difference. A parking strip can provide meaningful habitat and resources for pollinators. And the thing is to think about this on the community scale, the landscape scale. It's not just my garden. I mean, my garden matters, but what matters is that my neighbor has a garden, and the neighbor across the street, and there's one at the park. And so individual action is important, but when we all act together, it's that community of everyone coming together that really makes a bit, you get more bang for your buck when lots of people are doing this, and that really bolsters the ability of these pollinators to persist over time. So high quality pollinator habitat, of course, has food. That means plants that provide nectar and pollen, or host plants. Shelter and nest sites for cavity and ground nesting bees, which I'll talk a little bit about, and then safe habitat that's protected from pesticides, especially neonics and pathogens. This is an image from a bumblebee die-off where they sprayed some flowering trees with neonics, and it killed thousands of bumblebees. Okay, so creating habitat. We recommend using a variety of nectar or pollen plants. Try and have at least 3 species flowering at all times during the active season, but more is better. The more flowers you have, the better that's going to be for the pollinators. You want to think about bloom time, so having things blooming spring, summer, fall, even in California, even winter. You want to choose different colors and different shapes. Different sizes and shapes of bees and butterflies are good at pollinating different sizes and shapes of flowers. So having a variety means that you can support a bigger variety of pollinators. And pollinators seem to like flowers planted in masses. So having several plants of the same kind together rather than just one of each spread out, they seem to be attracted to flowers in masses. And often even bees and butterflies that are generalists will often, during a single foraging bout, go to the same type of flower, and I think it's an efficiency thing. So just having lots of types of flowers is great. Native plants tend to support a wider range of pollinators, including specialist bees and butterflies that have adapted to using particular species are probably going to be more likely to be supported by native plants. The other issue is that sometimes some ornamental plants that have been bred to be really showy or really fragrant or easy to grow in the garden, sometimes when we're breeding for those traits, other traits such as the ability to produce a lot of nectar and pollen are lost. And so a lot of times some of those ornamental plants aren't very good at providing resources for pollinators. So that's another reason to use natives. Include nest sites. As I said, native trees are great, and it also helps keep our cities cooler. And then again, if you're gonna build some pollinator habitat, don't spray it with insecticides. Try and keep it safe from that pesticide exposure. For the birders in the house, native plants tend to attract more insects than ornamentals and non-native plants. Many birds rely on insects for at least some stage of life. There's a cool study by Doug Tallamy. He's written a couple books. He's a great speaker if you have a chance to hear from him, showing that yards with at least 70% native plants, only those yards were able to produce enough insects to support a stable chickadee population. So the chickadees were feeding on all those insects, and native plants were the plants that were able to produce those insects that the birds need. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast. I want to leave time for questions. Nesting. So if you want ground nesting bees, you can leave some undisturbed areas, just patches of bare soil in your garden. It doesn't have to be large. Avoid using landscape fabric or heavy mulching for these species. They like areas with direct sunlight. So just having some undisturbed areas. And it doesn't have to be big, right? So this red arrow is pointing to a bee nest. There's another one on the other side. You don't have to have huge patches of bare dirt. Just a little bit of bare dirt in some areas can provide space for these ground nesting bees to live. Cavity nesting bees often like pithy stemmed plants, and the plant list that I will link to has a list of these pithy stemmed plants, but things like elderberry, wild rose, goldenrod, they like yarrow, penstemon. Leaving some of those plants will allow habitat for these bees to nest in. They do like dead wood. Some species will use dead wood or brush piles, so if it's fire safe and you have some of that, you can leave that for bees. We have resources. Again, I'll post a link to one of our fact sheets on nest sites for bees. For butterflies, again, you want to plant host plants for species in the area. And the good news is that if you want to support butterflies, you can have a messy yard. Leaving some untidy corners, some tall grasses, and leaving the leaves, at least in some parts of your garden, can be really beneficial. A lot of the caterpillar or the larvae, a lot of them will overwinter in the chrysalis stage on the ground, and they rely on that leaf litter to protect them from cool temperatures in the winter. And so leaving the leaves in some places will help these species persist. So if you want to have an excuse to be a lazy gardener, here it is. Okay, this is my backyard. There's my husband decked out in his Xerces gear. You can see I have a pretty small yard, probably like many of you. But oh boy, am I thankful for it, especially since COVID. I've been grateful for this space every day. So we moved in the fall of 2018, and we sheet mulched the backyard in the summer of 2019. And before planting this garden, we had one butterfly sighting. It was a cabbage white that just flew by. It didn't land on anything. And then we planted in the fall of 2019. Fall is a great time to plant natives because it's theoretically should start raining a lot and help the plants establish. And then this photo is taken in spring of 2020, so about 6 months growth. I'm pretty happy with it. In that time, so in 1 year since planting, we've observed 9 species of butterflies in our yard, including monarch butterflies, and 26 species of birds, which I think is pretty great because, first of all, it's pretty small and the planting is pretty young. But we are next to the Bannon Creek Parkway, and I think all those oaks help with our bird count. But it's exciting to think about what I'll see over time as the garden matures. A few of my favorite pollinator plants are buckwheats. I love buckwheats. Bees and butterflies love the flowers, and there are about 26 species of butterflies in California that specialize on buckwheats as host plants. So they're great butterfly plants. Phacelias are bee magnets. If you want bees in your yard, plant phacelias. This one is from the Natomas Pollinator Garden, and it was covered in bumblebees. Most of them are annuals. They have these really a lot of them have these really interesting flowers, but bees love them. Coyote Mint is a fantastic pollinator plant. I think it's my husband's favorite in our yard. It smells really nice, and once it bloomed, we started seeing a lot more butterflies in our yard. I love this. This umber skipper was from my yard. I like his little tongue sipping nectar. Goldenrod is another great pollinator plant. It blooms late in the summer, which is really nice plant to have that late summer bloom. Lots of insects use it. Monarchs really like it. Late summer, early fall blooming nectar plants can be really important for supporting monarchs during their migration. A few others, penstemon, I really like penstemon, and the bees in my yard really seem to like it. I have a lot of mimulus or monkey flowers that are great. Salvia, ribes, yarrow, grasses. There's a lot of butterflies like that skipper I just showed you that use grasses as host plants. Asters and milkweed are all great plants. These are things I have in my yard. They're all really great. Okay, community science. There are a lot of different ways that you can get engaged in science and help help us make better recommendations about management, about pollinators in our community. You can email me. I can tell you more about any of these. We run the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, which is, if you're out and you see a milkweed or monarch in any stage, you can upload the information to this mapper, or you can just upload it to iNaturalist, and that will get the information that way. Bumblebee Watch is really fun. If you see a bumblebee, take a picture, upload it to Bumblebee Watch, and people help you ID it. There's little cartoons that help you ID. This year, we're launching a California Bumblebee Atlas. So we'll be doing some trainings on Bumblebee ID, and we ask that people adopt a grid cell and then survey it for bumblebees twice a year to get a lot of training on how to do that. If any of this appeals to you, let me know. Right now is the Western Monarch Mystery Challenge. If you see a monarch and take a picture of it, you can email it to them or just through iNaturalist. But there's sort of this black box between when monarchs leave the overwintering site and about April, when most of the milkweed is emerging, that we don't really know what we're doing. So it's really important to get more information on what monarchs are doing right now. I can talk more about any of those if you're interested. Yeah, that's all I had. A whirlwind tour.
Angela, that was fantastic.
I hope it wasn't too fast.
Well, I have a question. Will it be possible to get your slide deck?
I could share it. Sure, because I did go fast.
Well, because there was a lot of things I was scribbling down, and I wasn't fast enough with the names. But also, there was one question about when you said about grasses. What did you mean by grasses?
So there's a lot of native grasses. I think June grass is adorable. Like if you want a cute grass.
Is that like campus grass or something? Or?
No, it's small. It's a little grass, and it's got this really fluffy seed head. So on that plant list, there should be some grasses on it, but there are several native bunch grasses. Some of them are small, some of them are huge, like deer grass. There are a few species of bumblebees that will nest at the base of bunch grasses. So something like deer grass works, but you could also plant small grasses like blue grama or Idaho fescue or June grass. So lots of skippers will use grasses, but many skippers have also adapted to using our lawn grasses as well. But it's nice to have that variety. A lot of birds eat the seeds from grasses, so it's good to have some of those in your yard.
It's good to, I see Jeff has his hand up.
Okay.
Do you have a question, Jeff?
Yeah, a couple things. I have to leave here pretty quick. I have a teenager, and if I don't feed her, it's not going to go well for me. It won't go well at all. Couple things. One about neonicotinoids. They are very injurious to bees. And you don't know it, but when you buy plants at Home Depot or Lowe's or Green Acres, it's very possible that they've been treated with neonics. And they are in the soil and they're uptaken by the roots of the plant, not only that you've purchased, but they stay in the soil for up to 3 years. Yeah. So that plant may die, you could plant something else. It's really important to ask your garden center, if their plant stock has been treated by neonics. Lots of times they'll tell you, I have no idea. And I would suggest not buying from that vendor. In some cities, people have organized a campaign and pressured Lowe's to order plants without neonic treatment. And even there's been a lot of pressure on Home Depot. Now here locally, it hasn't worked so far as I know. I've been in a dispute with Green Acres, which is a wonderful nursery. I mean, they are a fabulous family-run business, but they will not relent on this neonic thing. They won't tell people if their plants are treated with neonics. And so I've been in a bit of a dispute for them. I did write the ordinance banning neonics from city property, but their pesticides are regulated by the state. The city cannot pass an ordinance banning neonics from vendors in the city. So we don't have that kind of power. So I just wanted to put that out there, that be mindful of the plant stock that you buy if you buy plants. Now, if you buy from seed, that's a whole different situation. And, you're not going to have that kind of worry when you grow 3 things from seed. It's a heck of a lot cheaper. And I highly encourage you to plant seeds. It works really well.
So
Angela, I was hoping that you could speak a little bit about our project that we're working on the Ninos Parkway.
So we planted a pollinator garden at Ninos Parkway, and then that parkway is like 2.5 miles long. And our hope is that eventually to turn that into 2.5 miles of pollinator habitat. And it would be a beautiful place for people to go see wildflowers, but also an outdoor class space. There's several schools that are right close to there. I had some school groups help me plant the pollinator garden. And the idea is that we could have like community events, festivals. Students could do science projects in the garden. They can monitor it, help care for it. And it would just be, it would be beneficial for the pollinators. I think it would be beneficial for the community. It's a way to get kids doing science outside, but also connecting with nature. And I just think it could be such a wonderful, wonderful project. And so we put a grant into SMUD, and we didn't get it, but they gave us really good feedback. And so we're going to apply for that again this year. And hopefully over time, we can just continue to build up habitat along that parkway and just have it be a really wonderful place to walk and to observe nature.
And I'd like to add to that, Angela did put in the chat that the California Native Plant Society is having a sale this weekend. Is that correct?
Yeah, and let me check for sure. Yeah, so on Friday is when you can start ordering plants. They have one this weekend, and then in March, another one. And I know they don't use neonics or any other nasty pesticides. They have a lot of cool pollinator plants and other cool plants. If you want to, it's a good time to plant.
And so you would recommend that, and is Miraday another
Yeah.
recommendation for an organic nursery, a place to buy plants that are guaranteed?
Yeah. And we actually recently, I put a link to it. We have a new guide on buying pollinator safe plants. We have a webinar on it on our YouTube page.
Good.
The webinar was actually today, so it'll be posted on YouTube. But we have 2 days of action coming up where we would like people to, if you want to, sign up to talk to your nursery. They have like a script of questions and then submit the answers that you get. And so this is a nationwide thing we're doing on, I think one of the days is in March and then one is on Earth Day. These days of action to try and find out what nurseries are doing, but also try and move the needle. Because again, like Jeff said, Home Depot and Green Acres were the 2 places where we purchased milkweed, and they had 25 different pesticides on those plants, including the one that said neonic free had neonics. So the problem is a lot of times there are different steps in the supply chain, and maybe the nursery itself isn't spraying, but someone they bought it from is. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that if that's what the customer wants, I think the nursery industry will adapt, but people just have to ask for it.
Anything we can do to help move that
Yeah.
yeah, to make our, yeah, right. Well, Jeff, did you want to add to that? Did you?
Yeah, it really is consumer driven. Like I said, in Boulder, Colorado, and I think maybe in Eugene, Oregon, they were successful in pressuring the home stores into sourcing plants that were not treated with neonics. So it's what you're willing to buy and what you're willing to tell a vendor that you won't accept. I would like Green Acres to thrive. They are a great nursery. They have already committed to not using neonics on site, but they will not yet commit to sourcing plants from nurseries that don't use neonics. I've got to go, but the last thing I'd like to say is we have a great resource in Natomas in Angela Laws. She's obviously extremely knowledgeable, and I hope that you all can find a little bit of time to throw some energy into our Pollinator Garden Monarch Butterfly Flyway on Niños Parkway. Our vision is that if we get enough milkweed planted and enough pollinator plants up, that it will become a destination for Sacramento. As thousands of monarch butterflies flutter around Natomas, it'll be pretty special. Anyway, that's the vision we have, and we hope that you can help us get there.
I really appreciate you sharing and being here, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Great to see you all. Have a good evening.
Hi, Jeff.
Thank you so much. And we are at just coming up on the 7 o'clock hour, and I don't want to cut you off. I want you guys to have an opportunity to ask questions to Angela. But like Angela said, we are resubmitting the SHINE grant this year, and we will be meeting to talk about this Pollinator Parkway, the Miles for Monarchs. And so you can get in touch with me or with Angela, and we'll be sure to include you in on that conversation if you'd like. But right now, let's see if anybody else has questions for Angela about the presentation. It was a great presentation. Learned a lot. Learned a lot.
It was just, there was a question about oils, and I mean, they're certainly less problematic than a lot of insecticides. If you have specific ones, Bruce, that you want to ask about, I always send those to our pesticide team. We have a specific pesticide team, and they can tell you. But we have a lot of fact sheets and things about different pesticides and safe use of pest management.
Does that answer your question there, Bruce? About
basically, I just use it on the fruit trees to prevent the leaf curl, but I know that also will affect insects. So, and I don't spray for insects because I don't have a problem. Outside, there basically is no problem with insects as long as I don't know, just I'm lucky, but I just don't bother with insect sprays. But the leaf curl is a big issue, so I was just wondering about that.
I noticed, like, I had big mimulus plant, and I noticed early last spring it was covered in aphids. And part of me was like, oh, my poor plant, because this is my first garden, and part of me is afraid that at some point everything's just gonna die. So I was like really concerned. But after a few weeks, I noticed ladybugs starting to show up, and then suddenly all the aphids were gone. So it just sort of solved itself. It was a problem that solved itself.
Yeah, I've had the same thing, like plants covered with aphids, then you see 2 ladybug larvae, and then a week later, there's no aphids.
Yeah, yeah.
Love that.
And one of my work colleagues, her friend wanted a butterfly garden. And so she helped her choose some butterfly host plants. And later on, the friend was like, there are all these things eating my plants. What do I do? And she was like, no, that's the point.
That's the point. Yes, right.
So I like to telling people, thinking about, creating an ecosystem in your yard, and remembering that if we want butterflies in our yard, we have to have caterpillars in our yard, and they need to eat. And that means some ugly plants, maybe a little bit of leaf damage, but just tolerating that.
I saw
Then
Debbie
you get
had,
cool predators.
yep,
Okay.
Debbie, did you want to?
I also, I really like to watch my hummingbirds. So I'd like to find out
Mm.
which one of these pollinators, because I already have my lily of the Nile. They love that. They
Mhm.
also love my dahlias. But I also want to plant to attract different types of hummingbirds.
Mhm.
So should I check one of your lists? How do I cross-reference that?
Our lists mainly focus on insects. In my yard, they love fuchsia. They've been using the penstemon, columbine, they seem to like. I have ribes. I don't know if you want a currant or gooseberry in your yard. There's tons of lists for hummingbirds. I think UC Davis Arboretum, somebody mentioned they have a plant sale coming up. They have a list of hummingbird plants, but anything
Okay.
with tube-shaped plants. So fuchsia they love, columbine.
I have no
I've
shade
seen
in
them
my
use-
yard.
Okay.
So fuchsia, I love it, but
Fuchsia
I
would
can't
do
grow
well.
it.
Sage.
Oh, really?
They love sage, and that
Yep.
takes sun.
Sage?
Sage.
Okay,
Like
I
the
can put that
pineapple
into,
sage?
yeah, I could put that into one of the terracotta pots out in front, the sage.
Nancy,
Yeah,
would you have another recommendation for a hummingbird attractor? Nancy's my bird expert. You're mute.
Mhm.
You're on mute, Nancy.
There
Oh,
she
yeah, I
goes.
was just watching hummingbirds coming right up to my patio. I have a currant that I haven't planted yet, a Ribes malvaceum, I think. And they're just going right to it. It's in full flower right now. And I love those plants. So they like so many different plants. So something you can get at the yard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They
I
love
hope- I'm gonna-
thistles. It's hard to
Okay.
find native thistles, but I did get some cobweb thistle. It's not aggressive. It's doing pretty well. If it does well, I'm going to collect the seeds and try and grow it out. So if I can get anyone else to plant thistles, hummingbirds love it. Pollinators love it. Monarchs love it. It's
And the bees like,
bees love it.
yeah,
Yep.
Yeah.
cool. And how do we reach the iNaturalist that you spoke to about?
It's this awesome app. It's called iNaturalist. I'll
Uh-huh.
type it. So much fun. So if you're out and about and you see a bird or a plant or anything that you like, you take a picture of it and try and ID it. And then the whole community helps you ID it to species like, oh, yes, you're right. Or maybe you just see a bug and you say, okay, this is an insect. And someone will say, oh, it's a beetle. And someone else will
Okay.
say, like, oh, it's this family. So if you see a monarch, you can take a picture of that. And then we'll get the information for the monarch community
Okay.
science through that. And it helps us know where they are and what they're doing.
And it will hook
Um,
it to your GPS so that you know the location
Yep.
of it.
Oh, good. Because I
Yeah.
had a carpenter bee one year asleep in the morning inside of my dahlia, and I had no idea what it was. And then I tried to like bump it a little, people go, don't bump that one. So it was huge and it was beautiful though. I don't know if anyone else has seen them in their yard, but they're big.
There are several species of bees that the males sleep in flowers. It's really adorable to see them all
Yes,
curled
it
up.
is.
And
I
there's
have a
this,
picture of
yeah, there's a group of bees that specialize on squashes. And so the one scientist was saying that they found the easiest way to monitor them was to go out in the morning to the closed flower and just shake it. And if the flower starts buzzing, they know there's a bee in it. And so they would just monitor the flowers that way because
By
it's
ear.
an easy way to count the bees.
so much to learn. I love this. Thank you so much.
We could do this. We could do this for hours, I tell you, but it is, and I want to be mindful and respectful of people's time. And it's just after 7. I wanted to make sure that Angela's contact information has been put in the chat, Madam
I'll put it on the
Secretary. And does anybody else have a quick question? Any quick questions for Angela? And do email to the Garden and Arts Club if you'd like to be in on the Pollinator project, or if you'd like to know about any of our other ongoing projects with the GNNA and the air quality, we're working with the Office of Arts and Culture on the District 3 mural project. The lots of updates, lots of information. It was really nice to see you all and to visit. Annette, something to add?
Very quick, because I really enjoyed this, but my phone has been buzzing because a whole group of people did go to the California Air Resources Board. And the whole goal is to try to get air monitors, because we do live in a neighborhood that are packed up against freeways, tend to have worse air, which is bad for health and bad for a lot of things. So it looks like we had an entire army of people out there speaking on our behalf, because my phone is, I took it out of my pocket because I am ticklish and I didn't want to be going like this. So it's really, so this was wonderful. Angela, I live right behind the Pollinator Garden, so I'll look for you out there so I
Great.
can find out how I can help. But yeah, so there are people that are fighting the good fight while we do this.
Yes, Heather just texted me and said the CARB meeting just ended. So I'll be looking forward to an update from them on that. But there's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work for environmental justice in our neighborhood. Angela, you are one of them, and we love you so much. Big round of applause. Big round of applause. And thank you guys all for being here. I'll stick around if anybody has any questions. Other than that, we'll see you guys all. Oh, I wanted to make an announcement and say that at the March meeting, March 25th, we will be having a presentation from Taylor Gutemut. I'm hoping I'm saying her name right. She's the artist who did the artwork that's at the metal work at the South Natomas Community Center. So I've invited her to give a little presentation on what motivates her to work in the style and in the medium that she does. She's a fascinating, interesting South Natoman. So it'll be great to hear from her next month. And I hope to see you guys all then. Other than that, love you guys all.